The clouds hung low over the dusty town of Red Creek as Tessa Payton gripped the edge of the window frame, her knuckles white with fear. She had arrived in Montana territory just 3 days ago, and already her life had become a prison. The year was 1879, and Tessa had discovered too late that the promise of a teaching position had been nothing more than a cruel deception. "You'll make a fine wife," Bartholomew Jennings had sneered earlier that day, his tobacco-stained fingers catching her chin. "The preacher will be here tomorrow. Consider yourself fortunate, girl. Not many men would take in a woman with no family and no prospects." Tessa shuddered at the memory. 22 years old and newly orphaned after her parents' death from influenza back east, she had scraped together enough money for a stagecoach ticket west. The advertisement in the Boston newspaper had seemed like divine providence, a small Montana town seeking a schoolteacher, offering room and board until she could establish herself. She stared at the wedding dress laid out on the bed, plain and practical, like everything else in Jennings' mercantile. The man was 30 years her senior, with cold eyes that followed her every movement. His proposal had been more declaration than question, delivered with the casual confidence of a man unaccustomed to hearing the word no. A floorboard creaked outside her door, and Tessa stiffened. The lock clicked, and Jennings' sister Martha entered with a tray of food. "Best eat something," the older woman said, not unkindly. "Tomorrow's a big day." "I won't marry him," Tessa said, her voice stronger than she felt. Martha's eyes softened momentarily before hardening again. "You will." "This is the frontier, girl. Women don't survive alone out here. My brother is offering you protection." "Prison is not protection," Tessa countered. Martha set the tray down with a clatter. "Ungrateful thing. Do you know how many girls would thank the Lord for a man with a solid business? No children from his first marriage to raise, a roof over your head, food on your table, and bars on my windows." Tessa gestured to the wooden slats that had been nailed across the glass panes that morning. Martha sniffed. "That's just until you come to your senses. Bart says you tried to run yesterday. Because I don't want this marriage. One has little to do with survival, Miss Payton." Martha moved toward the door. "The dress will fit. I took in the measurements while you were sleeping last night." The door closed, the lock turning with grim finality. Tessa sank onto the edge of the bed, tears threatening. She wouldn't cry. Crying solved nothing. Instead, she moved to the small trunk containing her meager possessions, a few dresses, her mother's locket, her father's pocket watch, and several cherished books. Hidden at the bottom was a small knife her father had given her before she'd left. "The West can be dangerous for a woman alone," he'd warned. If only he had known the danger wouldn't come from wild animals or bandits, but from the very man who'd promised her safety. A sound from outside drew her attention. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In the alley below her window, a man was unloading supplies from a wagon. He glanced up, catching her eye through the slats. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. He was young, perhaps 25, with a strong jawline shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that curled at his temples. When he tipped his hat to her, Tessa stepped back from the window, heart pounding inexplicably. There was something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding, that made her feel seen for the first time since arriving in this God-forsaken town. She returned to her planning. The window was her only hope, but the bars made escape impossible. The door was solid oak, the lock well-maintained. Tessa paced the small room, mind racing. Tomorrow she would be forced to the altar, and then her fate would be sealed. As darkness fell completely, Tessa heard music from the saloon down the street, raucous laughter carrying on the night air. She imagined a different life, one where she taught eager children in a sunlit schoolhouse, where she chose her own path. A soft tap at her window startled her from her reverie. Tessa froze, listening. It came again, deliberate and quiet. Moving cautiously to the window, she peered between the wooden slats. The man from earlier stood in the shadows below, finger to his lips. He gestured for her to open the window. Tessa hesitated only a moment before working the latch, pushing the glass pane outward as far as the bars would allow. "Madam," he whispered, his voice a low rumble that barely carried. "Are you being held against your will?" Tessa nearly wept with relief at the simple recognition of her situation. "Yes," she breathed. "Bartholomew Jennings means to marry me tomorrow. I never agreed to it." The stranger's jaw tightened. "Jennings," he muttered as if the name left a bitter taste. "I've heard stories." "Can you help me?" Tessa asked, desperation edging into her voice. "Name's Wade Evans," he said instead of answering directly. "I ride for the Double C Ranch north of here." "Tessa Payton," she replied. "I came for a teaching position that doesn't exist." Wade nodded grimly. "One of Jennings' tricks. You're not the first." Cold fear gripped her. "What happened to the others?" "Some married him or his friends, others disappeared. Town gossip says they ran off, but—" He trailed off, eyes darkening. "Please," Tessa whispered. "I have nowhere else to go, but I cannot marry that man." Wade studied the barred window, then the drainpipe running alongside it, calculating. "The wedding's tomorrow morning. The preacher arrives on the early stage." He nodded once, decision made. "I'll be back. Be ready at dawn. Pack only what you can carry in one small bag. The bars, leave that to me." Wade glanced toward the street, then back at her. "Can you ride?" "Yes, my father taught me." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "Good. When I come back, there might not be time for explanations. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" Tessa nodded, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in days. "Get some sleep if you can," he said softly. "And Miss Payton, don't trust anyone else, not even the women in this town. Jennings has too many in his pocket." With that, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Tessa alone with her racing thoughts and a dangerous, fragile hope. She closed the window and moved away, afraid someone might have seen their exchange. Her fingers trembled as she began sorting through her belongings, deciding what she could bear to leave behind. The wedding dress on the bed seemed to mock her. Tessa grabbed it, stuffing it under the mattress in a small act of defiance. Sleep was impossible. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound from the saloon down the street or the creak of the building settling. As the night deepened, Tessa found herself wondering about Wade Evans. Why would a stranger risk himself for her? What was his connection to Jennings that had sparked such obvious dislike? Most importantly, would he really come back? Dawn arrived with painful slowness, the sky outside her window gradually lightening from black to deep blue. Tessa had been awake for hours, dressed in her sturdiest skirt and blouse, her small bag packed and hidden under the bed. She paced nervously, pausing at every sound from the street below. The town was beginning to stir. She heard Jennings moving about downstairs, opening his store. Soon Martha would come with breakfast, expecting to help Tessa prepare for the wedding. Time was running out. A soft scraping sound at her window made her jump. Wade Evans was perched precariously on the narrow ledge, a small saw in his hand. He worked quickly at one of the wooden bars, the teeth of the saw making minimal noise against the wood. Tessa rushed to the window, opening it as far as the bars would allow. "You came back," she whispered, relief washing over her. "Said I would, didn't I?" Wade responded, not pausing in his work. The first bar came free, and he moved to the second. "Anyone checked on you yet this morning?" "No, but they will soon." Wade nodded, concentration etched on his face as sweat beaded on his brow despite the cool morning air. The second bar came loose, leaving a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "That'll have to do," he said, pocketing his saw. "Can you fit?" Tessa assessed the opening. "I think so." "Good. My horse is in the alley. We need to move fast." Jennings usually opens the store at dawn, which means a sharp knock cut him off. "Tessa," Martha's voice called, "are you decent? I've brought your breakfast and it's time we started preparing you." Wade's eyes locked with Tessa's. "Now or never," he murmured. Tessa grabbed her bag from under the bed. "One moment, Martha," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not dressed yet." She heard an impatient sigh from the hallway. "Well, hurry up. Bart's already asking for you." Wade helped Tessa through the window opening, his strong hand steadying her as she maneuvered her skirts through the tight space. The drop to the ground was concerning, but Wade climbed down first, then reached up to guide her. "Careful now," he whispered as she dangled from the ledge, his hands finding her waist to ease her descent. The moment her feet touched the ground, another knock came at her door, louder this time. "Tessa," Martha called again, suspicious now. "Run," Wade said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the waiting horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its face. Behind them, they heard the door being unlocked, followed by Martha's outraged scream. "Bart! Bart, she's gone!" Wade boosted Tessa onto his horse, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. She felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back as he reached around her for the reins. "Hold tight," he instructed, and then they were moving, the horse's powerful stride carrying them down the alley just as Jennings burst from the back door of the mercantile, shotgun in hand. "Stop!" he roared, raising the weapon. Wade bent low over Tessa, shielding her as they rounded the corner. The blast of the shotgun echoed through the quiet morning streets, but they were already out of range, the horses' hooves thundering on the packed dirt as they fled the town. "He shot at us," Tessa gasped, clinging to the saddle horn as the horse galloped northward. "Jennings doesn't give up what he considers his property," Wade replied grimly, guiding the horse off the main trail and into a stand of cottonwoods that followed a shallow creek. "He'll come after us with men." "Where are we going?" Tessa asked, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had just fled with a man she barely knew, with nothing but a small bag of possessions to her name. "Double C Ranch is about 20 miles north," Wade answered. "My boss, Clayton Coleman, is a good man. He'll help us." "Us?" Tessa questioned, turning slightly to see his face. "You're in danger now, too," a muscle ticked in Wade's jaw. "Jennings and I have history. This isn't the first time I've crossed him." They rode in silence for several miles, Wade occasionally guiding the horse through streams to obscure their trail. The morning sun climbed higher, and Tessa began to relax incrementally, the tension in her shoulders easing as Red Creek fell farther behind them. "Thank you," she said finally. "I don't know why you risked yourself for me, but I'm grateful." Wade was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, Jennings pulled the same trick on my sister," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Advertised for a seamstress. By the time I tracked her down, he'd married her off to a friend of his, a man 30 years her senior with a mean streak a mile wide." Tessa's heart sank. "I'm so sorry." "She died in childbirth a year later," Wade continued, the words clipped with old pain. "Doctor said she was too small, too young for bearing children. She was just 19, understanding dawned on Tessa. So when you saw me, I wasn't about to let another woman suffer the same fate," he finished. "Not if I could help it." They crossed a shallow river, the horse picking its way carefully across the rocky bottom. On the far bank, Wade reined in, listening intently. "What is it?" Tessa asked, suddenly alert. "Riders," he said tersely. "Coming fast. We need to move." He urged the horse forward, setting a quicker pace. Tessa could hear it now, too, the distant thunder of hoofbeats, growing steadily louder. "They're gaining," she said, fear clutching at her throat. Wade guided the horse off the trail and into a dense thicket of pine trees. "Jasper can't outrun them with both of us on his back," he said, sliding from the saddle. "We'll have to hide and hope they pass us by." He helped Tessa down, then led the horse deeper into the trees, where a small clearing offered some concealment. The pines here grew thick enough to hide them from casual observation, but close enough to the trail that they could hear the approaching riders. "Stay low," Wade whispered, tying the horse to a tree branch before drawing his revolver. Tessa crouched beside him, her heart hammering in her chest. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, he replied, checking his ammunition. "Jennings will have offered a reward." The riders slowed as they reached the river crossing, and Tessa could hear men's voices carrying through the trees. "Tracks lead this way," one called. "They crossed here not long ago." "Spread out," another commanded. "Evans knows these woods, but he's got the girl with him." "They can't have gone far." Wade and Tessa exchanged glances. He motioned for her to stay absolutely still as the sound of horses entering the water reached them. "What do we do if they find us?" she whispered, barely audible. Wade's expression was grim but determined. "I won't let them take you back," he promised. The unspoken implication that he would fight if necessary hung between them. Hooves thudded on the opposite bank as the riders emerged from the river. They were close now, perhaps 50 yards away, moving slowly as they searched for signs of passage. "Check those trees," someone ordered. "They might have left the trail." Wade tensed beside her, his hand steady on his revolver. "If anything happens," he breathed, "run north. Keep the morning sun on your right. The Double C Ranch has a white fence and a big red barn. Ask for Clayton Coleman." Tessa wanted to protest that she wouldn't leave him, but the sound of approaching horses silenced her. A rider was coming directly toward their hiding place, pushing through the underbrush on a large black gelding. Wade positioned himself slightly in front of Tessa, shielding her with his body. The horse and rider came closer, branches snapping under the animal's hooves, 20 feet away. 15. 10. The horse suddenly snorted and shied, sensing their presence. The rider, a burly man with a bushy beard, peered into the trees, hand moving to his holster. "Found something," called another voice from further away. The bearded man hesitated, scanning the thicket where Wade and Tessa hid. For one terrible moment, Tessa was certain he had spotted them. Then, inexplicably, he turned his horse away. "Nothing here," he called back. "Just a deer trail." Wade remained motionless, not even seeming to breathe until the sound of the riders began to fade. Eventually, the forest fell silent again except for the natural sounds of birds and rustling leaves. "That was close," Tessa whispered, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Wade nodded, holstering his weapon. "Too close. We should move before they circle back." He helped her onto Jasper again before mounting behind her, his arms coming around to take the reins. Tessa was acutely aware of his closeness, the solid warmth of him at her back. There was something comforting in his presence, a steadiness she hadn't experienced since her father died. They continued north, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the cover of trees where possible. Wade explained that they would need to make a wide arc to the east before turning back west toward the ranch to throw off any pursuers. "It'll add a few hours to our journey," he said apologetically, "but it's safer." "I'm not complaining," Tessa assured him. "You've already done more than I could have hoped for." As they rode, Wade told her about the Double C Ranch, where he'd worked for the past 5 years. Clayton Coleman was a fair employer who'd built one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. There were a dozen other hands who worked the ranch, along with Coleman's wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children. Sarah's been wanting help with the children's schooling, Wade mentioned. Might be they'd be interested in hiring a teacher. Tessa's spirits lifted at the possibility. That would be wonderful. I did complete my teacher's training before coming west. Why did you come? Wade asked. Most women travel with family. Tessa's expression sobered. My parents died of influenza last winter. Our house and most possessions had to be sold to cover my father's medical debts. The teaching advertisement seemed like Providence, a fresh start in a new place. Wade's jaw tightened. Jennings preys on women in desperate situations, makes his offers sound legitimate. How does he get away with it? Tessa asked. Surely the local sheriff is Jennings' cousin, Wade interrupted flatly. And out here, law is whatever the most powerful man in town says it is. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The day grew warmer as noon approached, the Montana landscape stretching around them in rugged beauty. Despite her circumstances, Tessa couldn't help admiring the majestic mountains in the distance, the sweeping grasslands dotted with wildflowers. It really is beautiful, she remarked. Just as I imagined the West would be. Wade followed her gaze. It grows on you, he admitted. Took me a while to see past the hardships to the beauty, but now I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Where did you come from originally? Ohio. My father was a blacksmith. Taught me the trade before he passed. Is that what you do at the ranch? Wade nodded. Among other things. On a cattle ranch, everyone turns their hand to whatever needs doing. They stopped briefly at a small stream to rest the horse and drink some water. Wade shared the provisions he'd packed: jerky, biscuits, and dried apples. It wasn't fancy, but to Tessa, sitting beside the clear mountain stream with the sun warming her face and freedom in her grasp, it was the finest meal she could remember. We should reach the ranch by evening, Wade said as they prepared to move on. He helped her back onto Jasper, his hands strong and sure at her waist. As they resumed their journey, Tessa found herself studying Wade's profile when he wouldn't notice the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. There was a quiet competence about him that she found reassuring. By mid-afternoon, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Red Creek. Wade began to relax slightly, allowing Jasper to move at an easier pace. They were crossing an open meadow when Wade suddenly stiffened, pulling the horse to a halt. "What is it?" Tessa asked, instantly alert. "Riders coming up from the south," he said, his voice tense. "Too many to be coincidence." Tessa squinted in the direction he was looking. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of several horsemen moving fast. "Jennings?" she asked, fear returning in a cold wave. "Likely. And he's brought more men this time." Wade scanned their surroundings, assessing options. To their east was open country, no cover for miles. To the west, the land rose toward foothills with scattered pine forests. Behind them lay the way they'd come, and ahead, still hours away, was the Double C Ranch. The trees, Wade decided, turning Jasper toward the western foothills. "We need cover." He urged the horse into a gallop, and Tessa clung to the saddle horn as they raced across the meadow. The riders behind had spotted them, shouts carried on the wind, followed by the distant crack of a rifle shot. "They're shooting at us," Tessa exclaimed, ducking instinctively. "Too far for accuracy," Wade assured her, though his tone was grim. "But they're gaining." Jasper was tiring under the double burden, his stride laboring as they began to climb into the foothills. The tree line was still a quarter-mile away. "We won't make it," Tessa realized, watching the pursuers close the gap. Wade pulled Jasper to a sudden stop beside a large boulder. "Get down," he ordered, dismounting quickly and helping her to the ground. "What are you doing?" she asked as he removed his rifle from its scabbard, buying us time. Wade's expression was determined. "Take Jasper and ride for those trees. I'll hold them off." "No," Tessa protested. "I won't leave you here to face them alone." "This isn't a debate, Miss Payton." Wade checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. "One rider on a fresh horse stands a better chance than two on a tired one. I'll catch up." "They'll kill you," she argued, tears springing to her eyes at the thought. Wade's expression softened momentarily. He reached out, his calloused hand gentle against her cheek. "I'm harder to kill than I look," he said with a faint smile. "Now go, please." Their eyes locked for a long moment. Then Wade turned her toward Jasper, helping her mount. "Ride hard for those trees," he instructed. "Once you reach cover, find somewhere to hide and wait for me if I'm not there by nightfall." He hesitated. "Keep heading north to the Double C. Tell Clayton what happened." The approaching riders were less than half a mile away now. Wade slapped Jasper's flank, startling the horse into motion. "Run!" he shouted. Tessa had no choice. She bent low over Jasper's neck, urging him toward the distant trees as tears streamed down her face. Behind her, she heard the crack of Wade's rifle. Once. Twice. Answering shots echoed across the meadow. Tessa didn't look back, focusing instead on the trees ahead, growing closer with each powerful stride of the tired horse. She reached the tree line, guiding Jasper into the shelter of the pines. Only then did she risk a glance behind her. The scene at the boulder made her heart stop. Wade was crouched behind the rock, exchanging fire with the pursuers who had spread out in a semicircle about 200 yards away. As she watched, one of the riders toppled from his saddle. The others took cover, continuing to fire. Tessa hesitated, torn between the safety of the forest and her unwillingness to abandon Wade. Then she saw 3 riders breaking away from the main group, circling wide to flank Wade's position. "Behind you!" she screamed, though he was too far away to hear. Without thinking, Tessa wheeled Jasper around and raced back toward the boulder, ducking low in the saddle as bullets whistled past. Wade spotted her approach with obvious alarm, gesturing frantically for her to turn back. Instead, she guided Jasper straight to his position, extending her hand as she neared. "Get on!" she shouted. Understanding dawned in Wade's eyes as he spotted the flanking riders. In one fluid motion, he grabbed her outstretched hand and swung up behind her. Jasper staggered under the sudden weight but found his footing. "Go," Wade urged, and Tessa didn't need telling twice. She leaned forward, giving Jasper his head as they galloped back toward the forest. Behind them, bullets kicked up dirt and ricocheted off rocks. They reached the trees just as Jasper's strength began to fail. The exhausted horse slowed to a walk, sides heaving with exertion. "We need to let him rest," Wade said, sliding from the horse's back and helping Tessa down. "But not here. We're too exposed." They led Jasper deeper into the forest, following a narrow game trail that wound between ancient pines. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then stopped altogether. Their pursuers had either lost their trail or were regrouping. "That was foolish," Wade said when they paused in a small clearing, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern tinged with something like admiration. "You could have been killed." "So could you," Tessa countered. "I wasn't about to leave you behind." Wade studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Thank you," he said simply. They allowed Jasper 10 minutes to rest, offering him water from a small creek that trickled through the clearing. Wade checked their surroundings constantly, rifle ready. "We need to keep moving," he said finally. "They'll be combing these woods for us." "How far to the ranch now?" Tessa asked, stroking Jasper's neck soothingly. 8, maybe 10 miles. Wade glanced at the sun, already beginning its western descent. We won't make it before dark, not with Jasper this tired. What will we do? There's an old line shack about 3 miles north of here, Wade replied after a moment's consideration. Belongs to the Double C. We can shelter there for the night. They continued on foot, leading the exhausted horse through the forest. Wade set a challenging pace, aware that darkness would be their ally if they could reach the line shack before nightfall. Tessa kept up without complaint, though her city-bred feet were developing painful blisters in her impractical boots. The forest gradually thinned as they moved north, giving way to scattered trees and brushland. Wade grew increasingly vigilant, stopping often to listen and scan their backtrail. "Do you think they're still following?" Tessa asked during one such pause. "Jennings isn't a man who gives up easily," Wade replied grimly, "especially when his pride is wounded." The sun was setting when they finally spotted the line shack, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. It was simple but solidly built, with a corral for horses and a lean-to for firewood. "Wait here," Wade instructed, drawing his revolver as they approached. "Let me check it's empty." Tessa waited with Jasper, her eyes constantly sweeping their surroundings as Wade moved cautiously toward the cabin. He circled it once, peering through the single window before approaching the door with his gun ready. The door swung open on creaking hinges. Wade disappeared inside for several tense minutes before reappearing on the threshold and waving her forward. "All clear," he called. "Bring Jasper around to the corral." The small cabin was rustic but clean, containing a narrow bed, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and basic supplies. Wade quickly set about caring for Jasper while Tessa explored the cabin's provisions. "There's beans, coffee, and some dried meat," she reported when Wade returned, "and plenty of firewood." "Good. We'll need a fire tonight. Gets cold up here after dark." Wade barred the door with a heavy wooden beam, then checked the window shutters. "We should be safe enough for the night. This place is well hidden." As darkness fell completely, Wade built a small fire in the stove while Tessa prepared a simple meal from the supplies. They ate in companionable silence, both exhausted from the day's events. "You should take the bed," Wade said when they'd finished. "I'll keep watch for a while." Tessa looked at the narrow cot and back at him. "You need rest too." "I'll manage." He checked his weapons again, settling into one of the chairs with a clear view of both the door and window. Tessa hesitated, then moved to the bed, removing only her boots before lying down. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind replayed the events of the day, her escape from Jennings, the pursuit, the moment she'd ridden back for Wade. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bullets kicking up dust around them. "Wade," she said softly after a while. He turned from his vigil at the window. "What will happen now? Will Jennings keep hunting us?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Once we reach the Double C, you'll be safer. Clayton Coleman has influence in the territory. Jennings won't risk crossing him directly. And you, will you be safe?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Worried about me, Miss Payton. You saved my life," she replied simply. "And you've put yourself in danger for a complete stranger." "Of course I'm worried." Wade's expression sobered. "Jennings and I were always destined to clash again. This just hastened the inevitable." "Because of your sister," he nodded, staring into the glowing embers of the fire. "Her name was Willow. She was smarter than me by far. Wanted to be a teacher like you." His voice softened with memory. "After our parents died, I took work where I could find it. When I heard about ranching opportunities out west, it seemed like a chance for both of us to start fresh. I came ahead to establish myself, sent for her once I had steady work." "But she never made it to you," Tessa guessed gently. "Jennings intercepted her in Red Creek. By the time I tracked her down, she was already married to his friend Harold Simmons. Wade's hands clenched into fists. I tried to get her away, but she refused to leave, said it would be breaking her marriage vows before God. She sounds like she had strong principles, Tessa offered. She did. Pride and grief mingled in Wade's voice. When she died, I wanted to kill Simmons and Jennings both. Nearly did, in fact. Clayton talked me down, convinced me revenge wouldn't bring her back. He sounds like a wise man. Gave me purpose when I had none left. Wade looked at her directly. When I saw you at that window with the bars, he trailed off. I couldn't fail another woman the way I failed Willow. You didn't fail her, Tessa said firmly, and you certainly didn't fail me. Something passed between them, then a connection deeper than words could express. Tessa felt it like a physical presence in the small cabin, warming her more surely than the fire. Wade cleared his throat, breaking the moment. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day. Tessa nodded, settling back onto the thin mattress. This time, sleep came swiftly, carrying her into dreams where she rode endlessly across vast prairies with Wade's arms secure around her. She woke just before dawn to find Wade asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. In the gray pre-dawn light, he looked younger, the lines of vigilance smoothed from his face. Moving quietly, Tessa rekindled the fire and set water to boil for coffee. The domestic task felt strangely intimate in the confines of the small cabin. Wade stirred as the aroma of coffee filled the space. His hand moved instinctively to his revolver before his eyes had fully opened. Just me, Tessa said softly. Coffee, he straightened in the chair, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. Thank you. He accepted the cup she offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Did you sleep at all? She asked. Some, he admitted. No sign of pursuit during the night. They shared a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky, discussing their plan for the day. The Double C Ranch was still several hours' ride away, and Jasper would need to be rested before they attempted the journey. We'll leave at mid-morning, Wade decided. If we push steadily, we should reach the ranch by late afternoon. As Wade went to check on Jasper, Tessa washed their few dishes in water from the barrel outside. The morning was crisp and clear, the forest around them peaceful. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different context for their situation, not a desperate flight from danger, but perhaps a pleasant excursion into the mountains. She was drying the last cup when Wade returned, his expression tense. What is it? Tessa asked immediately. Riders coming from the south, he said tersely. 6, maybe 7 of them. Jennings, Wade nodded grimly, must have found our trail somehow. Tessa's momentary peace shattered. How long do we have? Minutes. They're moving fast. Wade was already gathering their few belongings. Jasper's not rested enough for both of us to outride them. Then what do we do? Fear crept into her voice despite her effort to remain calm. Wade moved to the window, assessing their options. His jaw tightened as he came to a decision. Listen carefully, he said, turning to face her. There's a trail behind the cabin that leads up into the rocks. It's steep but passable. Clayton's men use it sometimes when checking the high pastures. You want me to go alone? Tessa guessed, her heart sinking. It's our best chance, Wade insisted. I'll create a diversion, lead them away from here. Once they're gone, head north along that trail. It eventually joins the main track to the Double C. No, Tessa said firmly. We stay together. This isn't like yesterday, Wade argued. There are too many of them, and Jasper can't outrun fresh horses. Our only hope is to split up. And if they catch you, Tessa challenged. What then? Wade's expression hardened with resolve. They won't. Before she could argue further, he crossed to her in 2 quick strides. His hands came up to frame her face, and then he was kissing her, a brief, fierce press of his lips against hers that left her breathless. "For luck," he murmured as he pulled away, his eyes searching hers. Tessa stood frozen in surprise, her lips tingling from the contact. Wade moved to the door, checking his weapons. "Give me 10 minutes to draw them off, then take the North Trail. If anything happens, remember, Clayton Coleman at the Double C Ranch." "Wade," Tessa began, but he was already gone, slipping out the door and closing it softly behind him. Through the window, she watched him lead Jasper from the corral, mounting quickly. He gave her one last look, a gaze so intense it seemed to burn itself into her memory, before galloping away to the east, deliberately creating a visible dust cloud. Tessa counted out 10 agonizing minutes, gathering her courage and the few supplies she could carry. Outside, she heard distant shouts as Jennings' men spotted Wade. The thunder of hooves grew louder, then faded as they gave chase. Following Wade's instructions, she slipped out the back of the cabin and found the narrow trail leading up into the rocky outcropping. It was indeed steep, forcing her to use her hands at times to pull herself up the rougher sections. From her elevated position, she could see the riders in the distance, pursuing Wade across the open country. He was pushing Jasper hard, staying just ahead of them, drawing them further from her position. Tears blurred her vision. "Be safe," she whispered, before turning resolutely to the north. The trail was challenging, winding through rock formations and sparse pine trees. Tessa pushed on, ignoring the blisters forming on her feet and the burning in her lungs. Wade had risked everything for her. She wouldn't waste the chance he'd given her. By mid-afternoon, the trail descended from the high ground, joining a wider track that showed signs of regular use. Wheel ruts suggested wagons passed this way, and hoof prints indicated it was a common route for riders. Tessa followed it northward, hope rising in her heart. This must be the way to the Double C Ranch. The sun was low in the western sky when she crested a gentle rise and saw the ranch spread out below her. Just as Wade had described, a white fence enclosed a sprawling compound centered around a large red barn. Several smaller outbuildings clustered nearby, and a 2-story ranch house stood on a slight elevation, overlooking the property. Relief made Tessa's legs weak. She had made it. As she approached the main gate, a rider emerged from one of the outbuildings, spotting her immediately. He changed direction, cantering toward her with a rifle held casually across his saddle. "Hold up there," the man called as he neared. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that assessed her quickly. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss." "What brings you to the Double C?" "My name is Tessa Payton," she replied, her voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. "I'm looking for Clayton Coleman. Wade Evans sent me." The man's expression changed immediately. "Wade sent you. Where is he?" "He stayed behind to draw off pursuers," Tessa explained, the words catching in her throat. "Men from Red Creek working for Bartholomew Jennings." The rider muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. "I'm Clayton Coleman," he said, dismounting quickly. "Come with me, Miss Payton. You look about ready to drop." Clayton led her to the ranch house, calling for his wife as they entered. Sarah Coleman appeared immediately, a warm-eyed woman with practical hands and a gentle manner. She took one look at Tessa's exhausted state and began issuing quiet orders to the household staff. Within an hour, Tessa found herself washed, changed into borrowed clothes, and seated at the Coleman's kitchen table with a hearty meal before her. Between careful bites, she told them everything: her deception by Jennings, Wade's rescue, and their flight across the countryside. "Wade stayed behind," she concluded, fighting tears. "He led Jennings' men away to give me time to escape. That was hours ago. He should have been here by now." Clayton and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. "Jennings is a dangerous man," Clayton said gravely, "but Wade knows how to handle himself." "I'll send some of the hands out to look for him," Clayton decided, rising from the table. "Jim and Lucas know those trails better than anyone." As Clayton left to organize the search party, Sarah refilled Tessa's cup with hot tea. "Wade is a good man," she said quietly. "The best hand we've ever had, more like family than an employee." "He told me about his sister," Tessa said. "About what happened to her." Sarah nodded sadly. "Willow's death nearly destroyed him. For months after, he was like a ghost going through the motions but not really living. Clayton and I feared we might lose him too." He said Clayton talked him out of seeking revenge. "It wasn't easy," Sarah admitted. "Wade had murder in his heart." But Clayton convinced him that dishonoring his sister's memory with violence wouldn't bring her peace. "He's still carrying that pain," Tessa observed. "Yes, but until yesterday, I'd say he was merely existing, not truly living." Sarah studied Tessa with perceptive eyes. "Now I'm not so sure. There's something different in the way you speak about him, and the way he risked himself for you." Before Tessa could respond, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard drew their attention. Sarah moved quickly to the window. "Riders coming in," she reported. "Multiple horses." Tessa's heart leapt with hope, then plummeted as Sarah's expression grew concerned. "It's not Wade," she said, moving toward the door. "Stay here." Unable to obey, Tessa followed Sarah onto the porch. 5 riders were dismounting in the yard, ranch hands returning from a day's work, judging by their dusty appearance. They were clustered around Clayton, listening intently as he gave instructions. As Tessa watched, 2 of the men immediately remounted and rode back out, heading in the direction she had come from. The search party for Wade, she realized. Clayton returned to the house, his expression carefully neutral when he saw Tessa. "Jim and Lucas are going to backtrack your trail," he explained. "If Wade's out there, they'll find him." "And if Jennings' men have him?" Tessa asked, voicing her deepest fear. Clayton's jaw tightened. "Then we'll deal with that when we know more. In the meantime, Sarah will show you to a room. You need rest." Despite her protests that she couldn't possibly sleep while Wade was missing, Tessa found herself installed in a comfortable guest room. Sarah provided a nightgown and promised to wake her immediately if there was any news. Left alone, Tessa moved to the window. The sun had set and darkness was settling over the ranch. Somewhere out there, Wade might be hurt, captured, or worse. The thought was unbearable. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering his kiss, brief but intense, filled with unspoken feelings. Had it been merely a gesture of farewell, or something more? Sleep eventually claimed her, though it was restless and filled with troubling dreams. She woke several times during the night, each time moving to the window to scan the yard for any sign of riders returning. Dawn was breaking when a commotion outside finally drew her fully awake. Throwing a shawl over her nightgown, Tessa rushed downstairs and onto the porch. In the gray morning light, she saw several riders entering the yard. The lead horse carried 2 people, and with a surge of joy that nearly buckled her knees, Tessa recognized Wade's broad shoulders and dark hair. He was slumped forward slightly, one arm held at an awkward angle, but he was alive. The ranch hand riding behind him was supporting him, helping him stay in the saddle. Tessa flew down the porch steps as Clayton and Sarah emerged from the house behind her. Wade looked up at her approach, his weary face lighting with relief. "You made it," he said as she reached him, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Of course I did," she replied, tears threatening. "You gave me excellent directions." With help from Clayton and the others, Wade dismounted carefully. Tessa saw now that his left arm was crudely bandaged, blood seeping through the cloth. "You're hurt," she said, reaching toward the injury instinctively. It's nothing serious, Wade assured her, though his pallor suggested otherwise. Bullet grazed me. I've had worse. Inside, Sarah ordered firmly. Now, that needs proper tending. As they moved toward the house, Wade kept Tessa close to his uninjured side as if reassuring himself of her presence. Jennings' men? Clayton asked quietly. Wade nodded. Lost most of them in the hills, but 2 tracked me nearly to Bear Creek Canyon. Got careless crossing open ground. And the men who shot you? A grim smile touched Wade's lips. Won't be a problem anymore. Jim and Lucas found me handling the aftermath. Clayton nodded, understanding passing between the men. Tessa didn't ask for clarification, sensing some things were better left unspoken. In the kitchen, Sarah examined Wade's wound with practiced hands. Clean through the muscle, she reported. No bone damage, but you've lost blood. You'll need stitches and rest. Wade submitted to Sarah's ministrations with stoic patience, wincing only when she cleaned the wound with whiskey. Throughout the process, his eyes rarely left Tessa, who had changed quickly and now sat nearby, ready to assist. What about Jennings? Tessa asked when Sarah had finished bandaging Wade's arm and gone to prepare a bedroom for him. He wasn't with the men who pursued us, Wade replied, sipping the coffee Clayton had poured for him. My guess is he's back in Red Creek by now, planning his next move. Will he come here? The thought of bringing danger to the Coleman's doorstep horrified her. Clayton answered before Wade could. Let him try. The Double C isn't Red Creek. Here we make our own law, and we protect our own, Wade added, his gaze intense as it met Tessa's. Clayton cleared his throat. Speaking of which, Miss Payton is welcome to stay with us as long as she needs. Sarah mentioned you have teaching experience. Yes, Tessa confirmed, surprised by the change in subject. I was trained as a school teacher in Boston. Interesting, Clayton mused. Sarah's been saying for years that our children and several from neighboring ranches need proper schooling. We've been considering building a small schoolhouse come spring. Hope blossomed in Tessa's chest. Are you offering me a position, Mr. Coleman? If you're interested, Clayton replied with a smile. In the meantime, you could start with just our 2 youngsters. Sarah's been teaching them their letters, but she'd welcome the help. I would be honored, Tessa said, gratitude overwhelming her. Thank you. Wade's good hand found hers under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze that sent warmth flooding through her. The next few days established a new rhythm to Tessa's life. She spent mornings working with the Coleman children, 8-year-old Thomas and 6-year-old Elizabeth, who proved to be bright and eager students. Afternoons were often passed helping Sarah with household tasks or exploring the ranch buildings. And whenever possible, she visited Wade, who had been installed in a small cabin near the main house to recover. Though he chafed at the inactivity, Sarah was firm about allowing his wound proper time to heal. On the 3rd evening, Tessa brought dinner to his cabin, finding him seated on the small porch, staring at the sunset. He looked better, color had returned to his face, and he moved with less stiffness. Sarah sent food, Tessa explained, setting the covered tray on a small table. She says you're to eat all of it or face her displeasure. Wade smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. A threat to take seriously, he agreed, gesturing for her to join him on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching as the sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and pinks. Clayton tells me you've agreed to stay and teach, Wade said finally. Tessa nodded. It's a wonderful opportunity. The children are delightful, and Sarah mentioned there might be more students once word spreads. You'll be good at it, Wade said with quiet certainty. This place needs someone like you. Something in his tone made Tessa look at him more closely. And what about you? Will you stay at the Double C, Wade was silent for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted. "Clayton offered me a parcel of land last year northeast corner of the ranch, said I'd earned a chance to build something of my own." "Your own ranch?" Tessa asked, trying to picture it. "A small one to start. Good water supply, decent grazing, enough to support a modest herd." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Enough to support a family eventually." Tessa's heart quickened at the implication. "That sounds like a worthy ambition." "It does," Wade agreed, turning to face her directly. "But it would be a hard life, especially at first. Long days, simple comforts. Nothing like the life you might have had back east." "The life I might have had back east disappeared with my parents," Tessa said softly. "And simple comforts with good company seem far preferable to luxury with someone like Jennings." Wade's expression darkened at the mention of Jennings. "We haven't heard any word of him in days. That worries me." "Do you think he'll try something, eventually? Men like Jennings don't forgive perceived slights." Wade unconsciously rubbed his injured arm. "But we'll be ready when he does." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they shared the meal Sarah had prepared. Tessa described her day with the children, and Wade spoke of plans for the small house he intended to build on his land. As twilight deepened into true darkness, they moved inside the cabin, where a small fire warded off the evening chill. The space was simple but comfortable: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a chest for clothing, and a small bookshelf containing a surprising number of volumes. "You read," Tessa observed, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "When there's time," Wade acknowledged. "My mother believed education was important, even for a blacksmith's son." Tessa pulled out a volume of Tennyson's poetry, smiling as she opened it. "My father loved Tennyson," she said. "He used to read Ulysses aloud on winter evenings." Wade moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield," he quoted softly. "You know it," Tessa said, pleased. "It seemed appropriate after Willow died," Wade admitted. "A reminder to keep going, even when it seemed pointless." Tessa turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "And now, does it still seem pointless?" Wade's eyes, normally so guarded, were open and vulnerable as they met hers. "No," he said simply. "Not anymore." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then, with deliberate care, Wade took the book from her hands and set it aside. His good arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. "I've been wanting to do this properly," he murmured, "since that moment at the line shack." His lips found hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity as Tessa responded. Unlike their first brief kiss, this one lingered, deepening into an exploration that left them both breathless when they finally parted. "I should go," Tessa whispered, though she made no move to leave the circle of his arm. "Sarah will wonder where I am." "Stay," Wade said, then quickly added, "just to talk. I'll walk you back to the house later." They sat before the fire, talking long into the night. Wade told her more about his childhood in Ohio, his journey west with dreams of building a new life. Tessa spoke of her parents, her education, the shock of finding herself suddenly alone in the world. "When I came west, I thought I was simply seeking employment," she confessed. "But I think I was really looking for somewhere to belong again." Wade's hand found hers, his calloused fingers lacing with her smaller ones. "And have you found it, that sense of belonging?" Tessa met his gaze steadily. "I'm beginning to," she said softly. It was nearly midnight when Wade finally walked her back to the main house, the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars. At the porch steps, he kissed her again, a tender promise of things to come. "Good night, Miss Payton," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the proper address. "Good night, Mr. Evans," she replied with a smile, reluctantly releasing his hand. The next week passed in a haze of newfound happiness. Tessa settled into life at the Double C, growing more comfortable with her role as teacher and becoming friends with Sarah. Wade's wound healed steadily, allowing him to resume light duties around the ranch. They found moments to be alone, walks along the creek in the evening, quiet conversations on the porch after supper. Each day, Tessa felt herself falling deeper in love with this serious, honorable man who had risked everything to save her. It was during one such evening walk, 10 days after their arrival at the ranch, that Wade stopped beside a flowering meadow and turned to her with unusual solemnity. "There's something I need to ask you," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I know it hasn't been long, barely 2 weeks since we met, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Tessa's heart quickened as he took both her hands in his. "I love you, Tessa Payton," he said simply. "I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you at that window in Red Creek. These past days have only confirmed what my heart already knew." Tears of joy blurred Tessa's vision. "I love you too," she whispered. Wade's expression lightened with relief and happiness. "Then would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer you luxury or ease, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, a seal on their promise, his arms strong and secure around her. When they finally parted, Wade pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed in a moment of pure contentment. "I've been thinking," he said after a while. "We should wait to start building on my land until after we're married. Clayton and Sarah have offered to host the wedding here at the ranch in 2 weeks, if that suits you." 2 weeks sounds perfect, Tessa agreed, then hesitated. "But what about Jennings? Won't he try to stop us?" A shadow crossed Wade's face. "That's the other reason I want to marry soon. Once you're my wife, you'll have additional legal protection. And I want everyone in the territory to know you're spoken for." They returned to the ranch hand in hand, sharing their news with the Colemans, who received it with genuine delight. Sarah immediately began planning the wedding, promising to help Tessa create a suitable dress. The next 2 weeks were filled with preparations. Word spread quickly, and neighboring ranchers expressed intentions to attend, partly out of friendship with Clayton, partly out of curiosity about the woman who had captured Wade Evans' heart. Through it all, Tessa kept expecting trouble from Red Creek. Each rider approaching the ranch made her tense until their identity was confirmed. Wade shared her concern, doubling the guards on the property, and refusing to let her venture beyond the immediate ranch buildings without escort. 3 days before the wedding, Clayton received a visitor, the territorial marshal, a grizzled man named Harlan Foster, whom Clayton had known for years. "Thought you should know," Foster told them over coffee in the ranch house. "Bartholomew Jennings has filed a complaint claiming Wade abducted a woman who was promised in marriage to him." Wade's hand tightened around Tessa's. "That's a lie," he said flatly. "Miss Payton was being held against her will." Foster nodded. "I figured as much. Jennings has a reputation I don't much care for, but I needed to hear your side." Tessa recounted her experience, the deceptive advertisement, her imprisonment, the forced wedding preparations. Foster listened intently, occasionally making notes. "That matches other reports I've received over the years," he said when she'd finished. "Never had enough evidence to act on them, though." "So what happens now?" Clayton asked. Foster sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Officially, I need to investigate the complaint. Unofficially." He glanced at Wade and Tessa. "How soon is this wedding of yours?" 3 days, Wade answered. "Good. Once you're legally married, Jennings' claim becomes much weaker." Foster set down his cup. I can stall my investigation easily enough. Just make sure that wedding happens without delay." "Thank you," Tessa said fervently. The marshal fixed her with a kind but serious gaze. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Payton. Jennings isn't likely to give up easily. Be on your guard until then." After Foster departed, security at the Double C tightened even further. Clayton positioned men at the ranch boundaries, and Wade rarely left Tessa's side. The night before the wedding, a small gathering was held in the ranch house, a simple celebration with the Colemans and the ranch hands who had become Tessa's friends. There was music from a fiddle played by one of the cowboys, dancing in the cleared main room, and plentiful food prepared by Sarah and the cook. Tessa found herself swept up in the joy of the moment, her fears about Jennings temporarily forgotten as Wade led her in a dance, his recovered arm strong around her waist. Having second thoughts, he teased when he caught her looking pensive. "Never," she assured him. "I was just thinking how strange life can be. A month ago, I was alone in Boston, wondering how I would survive. Now I'm here, surrounded by friends, about to marry a man I love beyond reason." Wade's smile was tender as he drew her closer. "I thank God every day that I happened to be in Red Creek when you arrived." As the evening wound down, Sarah pulled Tessa aside. "It's tradition for the bride to spend the night before the wedding apart from her groom," she explained. "You'll stay in the main house tonight and Wade will return to his cabin." Though the separation was brief, Tessa found it difficult to say goodnight to Wade. "It's only for one night," he reminded her, kissing her softly at the door. "Tomorrow we begin forever." Sleep proved elusive despite her comfortable bed. Tessa stood at the window of her room, looking out at the peaceful ranch bathed in moonlight. In the distance, she could see a light still burning in Wade's cabin. She was about to turn away when movement caught her eye, shadows moving between the outbuildings, too purposeful to be ranch hands on legitimate business. Alarm surged through her as she counted 4, then 6 figures converging on Wade's cabin. Without stopping to think, Tessa threw a shawl over her nightgown and slipped from her room. The main house was quiet, its occupants asleep. She crept down the stairs and out the back door, keeping to the shadows as she moved toward Wade's cabin. The night was cool, the ground damp with dew beneath her bare feet. Tessa made her way carefully, staying low and using the buildings for cover. As she neared Wade's cabin, she could hear low voices, unfamiliar men speaking in hushed tones. "Jennings wants him alive," one said. "The woman too, if she's here." "And if he resists?" another questioned. "Make sure he doesn't," came the cold reply. Tessa's blood froze. Somehow, Jennings' men had found them, and they meant to take Wade, possibly to prevent the wedding, possibly for revenge. Either way, she couldn't let it happen. The men were positioning themselves around the cabin, 2 at the front door, 2 at the back, and 2 circling to the sides. They hadn't spotted her yet, concealed as she was behind the woodpile. Tessa glanced toward the main house, wondering if she could raise the alarm in time. It was too far by the time she reached it and woke the others. The attack would already be underway. A desperate plan formed in her mind. If she could create a distraction, perhaps Wade would have time to defend himself or escape. It was risky, but she could see no alternative. Picking up a piece of firewood from the pile, Tessa took a deep breath and hurled it at the barn, where several horses were stabled. The wood struck the side of the building with a loud crack, startling the animals inside. Instantly, the horses began stamping and nickering in alarm. The men at Wade's cabin froze, heads turning toward the noise. Tessa used their momentary distraction to move closer to the cabin, staying in the shadows. She needed to warn Wade. The curtain at one of the windows moved slightly. Wade had heard the commotion. Tessa saw his silhouette, careful and alert as he peered out. One of Jennings' men spotted the movement. "He's up," he hissed. "Go now." Everything happened at once. The men rushed the cabin from all sides. The front door burst open as Wade fired a warning shot that sent the attackers diving for cover. "Wade!" Tessa screamed, abandoning stealth for speed as she ran toward the cabin. One of the men intercepted her, grabbing her arm roughly. "Got the woman," he called to the others. Tessa fought wildly, kicking and clawing at her captor. She managed to break free momentarily, only to be seized again by stronger hands. "Let her go." Wade's voice rang out from the doorway of the cabin. He stood framed in the light, revolver aimed steadily at the man holding Tessa. "Drop the gun, Evans," another man ordered, stepping into view with his own weapon trained on Wade. "Or the lady gets hurt." Tessa could see Wade calculating odds, his eyes darting from her to the men surrounding them. There were too many, and she was a liability, a hostage they could use against him. Suddenly, the night exploded with the sound of a rifle shot. One of Jennings' men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. More shots followed in rapid succession, and figures emerged from the darkness. Clayton and the ranch hands, alerted by the commotion. "Double C riders!" Someone shouted in warning. The man holding Tessa cursed, shoving her roughly to the ground as he turned to flee. Wade was beside her in an instant, helping her up and pulling her toward the safety of the cabin. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. "No," Tessa assured him, though her heart was racing. "I saw them from my window. They were coming for you." Outside, the brief skirmish was ending. Two of Jennings' men lay wounded but alive on the ground while the others had fled into the night. Clayton approached the cabin, rifle still at the ready. "Everyone all right?" he called. "We're fine," Wade confirmed, keeping Tessa close to his side. "Thanks to your timely arrival," Clayton's expression was grim. "Sarah noticed Tessa was missing. When we couldn't find her in the house, I roused the men." He gestured to the wounded intruders. "Jennings' work, undoubtedly," Wade agreed. "Trying to stop the wedding, I'd guess." One of the ranch hands approached, leading a horse. "Found this tied in the trees beyond the north fence," he reported. "There are more tracks. Looks like they came in from that direction." "Post extra guards tonight," Clayton ordered, "and send someone for Marshal Foster at first light. I want these men in custody before the wedding." The wounded men were secured in an empty storeroom under guard. Sarah arrived, wrapping a blanket around Tessa's shoulders and scolding her gently for her recklessness. "You could have been killed," Wade said when they were alone in the cabin, his voice rough with emotion. "What were you thinking, confronting them alone?" "I was thinking they meant to hurt you," Tessa replied simply. "I couldn't let that happen." Wade pulled her into a fierce embrace, his heart pounding against hers. "Don't you understand? None of this matters if something happens to you." "The same goes for you," Tessa whispered against his chest. "We protect each other. That's what love means." He held her for a long moment before releasing her reluctantly. "Sarah's right. You should go back to the house. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding." Tessa laughed despite the lingering tension. "I think we've had enough bad luck already. Tomorrow will be perfect, you'll see." Marshal Foster arrived mid-morning with 2 deputies, taking the wounded men into custody and increasing patrols around the ranch. "Jennings won't be fool enough to try anything with me here," he assured them. "And I've brought a circuit judge with me. He's authorized to perform the ceremony." The wedding was set for 2 o'clock. Sarah helped Tessa dress in the simple but elegant gown they had created together, ivory cotton with delicate lace trim, salvaged from Sarah's own wedding dress. Her hair was arranged with white flowers from the ranch garden, and around her neck hung her mother's locket. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. "Wade won't know what hit him." The ceremony was held in the ranch house's main room, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for the occasion. Despite the morning's excitement, nearly 30 people had gathered: the Coleman family, ranch hands, and neighbors from surrounding properties. Tessa felt a moment's sadness that her parents couldn't witness this day, but as Clayton escorted her into the room, that feeling was quickly replaced by joy. Wade stood waiting for her, clean-shaven and handsome in a new dark suit, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. The judge's words were traditional and heartfelt, speaking of commitment and partnership in the face of life's challenges. When he asked who gave this woman in marriage, Clayton stepped forward. "My wife and I do," he said, placing Tessa's hand in Wade's. "I, Wade Evans, take thee, Tessa Payton." Wade's voice was steady, his eyes shining with love as he spoke his vows. "I, Tessa Payton, take thee, Wade Evans." Tessa's own voice trembled slightly with emotion but grew stronger with each word of promise. The simple gold bands they exchanged had been Clayton's gift, made by the blacksmith in a neighboring town and delivered just in time for the ceremony. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Wade's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their union before friends who had become family. As they turned to face the assembled guests, Tessa felt a sense of rightness, of homecoming, that she had thought lost forever after her parents' deaths. The celebration that followed was joyful, a feast prepared by Sarah and the ranch cook, music from the ranch hand's fiddle, dancing that continued as afternoon turned to evening. Through it all, Wade kept Tessa close, as if unwilling to let her out of his sight after the previous night's danger. Marshal Foster approached them as the festivities began to wind down. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "Those men we captured have agreed to testify against Jennings. Seems they didn't appreciate being abandoned when things went wrong last night." "What will happen to him?" Tessa asked. "With their testimony and yours, I'll have enough to bring charges: kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy. He'll face a territorial judge in Helena." Foster's expression was satisfied. "His days of preying on vulnerable women are over." "Thank you, Marshal," Wade said sincerely, shaking the older man's hand. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, creating pools of golden light in which couples continued to dance. Wade led Tessa away from the main gathering, toward the small cabin that had been freshly cleaned and decorated for their first night as husband and wife. "Happy?" he asked softly as they walked arm in arm under the star-filled sky. "Completely," Tessa assured him. "Though I still can't quite believe all that's happened. A month ago we were strangers. And now—" Wade stopped, turning to face her fully. Tessa smiled up at him, her heart overflowing. "Now you're my husband, my partner, my home." "And you're my heart," Wade replied simply, bending to kiss her again, a kiss filled with promise and passion, and the beginning of forever. Behind them, the celebration continued, voices and laughter carrying on the night air. But for Wade and Tessa, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, and the life they would build together, a life born from danger and desperation, but transformed into something beautiful by love and courage. 3 years later, Tessa stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Wade taught their 2-year-old son James to sit on a gentle pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, echoed by his father's deeper chuckle. So much had changed since that desperate day in Red Creek. Bartholomew Jennings had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His victims, women lured by false advertisements over the years, had come forward one by one, their testimonies ensuring justice was served. Wade and Tessa had built their home on the land Clayton had given them, a comfortable two-story house overlooking a creek, with a barn and corrals for the horses Wade raised and trained. Their cattle operation was small but growing. Supplemented by the income from the school, Tessa taught 3 days a week in a building constructed midway between their ranch and the Double C. "Mama, look," James called, his small hands clutching the pony's mane as Wade led the animal in a circle. "I see you, my brave boy," Tessa called back, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew. Life on the frontier was not easy. There were harsh winters, dry summers, and the constant work of maintaining a ranch. But each challenge they faced together, their love deepening with shared struggles and triumphs. Wade looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as powerful as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps more so for the life they had built together. Tessa thought back to that terrifying moment behind the curtain in Red Creek, when she had wept with despair at what seemed an inescapable fate. She could never have imagined then that those tears would lead to such happiness, or that the whispered words of a stranger, "Run when I say run," would be the beginning of a love story still unfolding, day by day, in this wild and beautiful land they now called home.